Hey, welcome to the Economic Report. It's Brian here. Thanks for joining me. Today we're talking about troop deployments inside of the United States. And I want to make sure that we're understanding the big picture about what's going on. Number two, why it's going on, and maybe a closer look at the history of these troop deployments inside of the United States. And maybe most of all, how it affects you and also how it affects people like us and our wallets here on Main Street. First and foremost, I want to make sure that we're understanding a couple of things here about soldier deployments and the reasoning behind it. First of all, I want to talk to you about what's going on currently, and of course, what's happening right now? Well, the Pentagon, the White House, and in some cases, reluctant states are seeing soldiers move into their cities. We've seen this happen in D.C., for instance.
Overnight, National Guard troops armed while patrolling the streets of Washington. A defense official telling NBC News they're officially authorized for self-protection. At least 6 Republican-led states are also sending in their own troops as reinforcements. President Trump now promising to expand his crackdown on crime beyond the nation's capital to other cities, including New York, Baltimore, and Chicago.
When we're ready, we'll go in and we'll straighten out Chicago, just like we did D.C. Chicago is very dangerous.
Violent crime in Chicago has often drawn headlines.
Now, you may ask yourself the question, why on earth are soldiers going into D.C.? And the president's claim is there is high crime, high homelessness, and high incidence of violence. And with that, the president has the ability, at least in D.C., to send soldiers into these areas. Now, I want to make sure that we're understanding they are not federal soldiers. They are National Guardsmen, so they are in part-time soldiers here, but have been called up and been deployed for various reasons. Now, of course, I'm throwing this out there to you because in Los Angeles, not that long ago, there were ICE raids taking place, and with that, there started to become riots in LA as well. And what happened almost immediately? The president deployed National Guardsmen to the area in LA, and almost overnight, the people who were going to riot disappeared. Now, we can talk about whether or not the military could or should be used on civilians, and maybe just the fact that they were there really stopped from a riot really boiling over to the destruction of personal property and private property, of course, and maybe extra violence that wasn't necessary. But with this comes a precedent that's being established here, and it's not anything completely new, but it's happening during the Trump administration because we know there are some different initiatives that are being put in place by the president, from immigration to crime and violence to ending drugs, and you kind of get the picture. So the military, in a way, is being used as a backbone, a show of force, and in many cases, a policing authority to stop violent things from taking place. Now, the big question is whether or not this should continue from D.C. to places like Chicago and other areas that might be deemed as trouble spots. So we can go ahead and look for a historical precedent, whether or not this has ever happened before. And we could say in recent history, probably not. But if you go back in history a little bit, we can say from the very beginning, like first term, George Washington took 10,000 federal soldiers and marched them out to western Pennsylvania to calm what was known as the Whiskey Rebellion. And this was a group of people who decided they weren't going to pay their taxes. And of course, George Washington said, this is the job of the executive branch of government to enforce the law. And what happens? Well, the president of the United States personally marched 10,000 soldiers out to western Pennsylvania to put down the rebellion, and it miraculously disappeared. Not too long thereafter, there was another incident inside the Andrew Jackson administration where Jackson said, hey, South Carolina does not want to pay their tariffs, and as a result, I want to do the Force Act. I will personally march soldiers down to South Carolina to make sure people in South Carolina pay their taxes. And of course, that never happened. However, the fact was that the president was willing to take federal soldiers down to South Carolina to drive home a point. And of course, there have been other incidents throughout history as well. During the Vietnam War, for instance, very, very turbulent time in American history. You saw soldiers once again in the streets. I was just talking to a Vietnam veteran the other day and said that he was a cook in the United States Army. However, during the riots in Baltimore, he was taken off the cook line and he was given an M16 and he was sent to march through the streets of Baltimore in order to calm the city and to stop the destruction of private and personal property. So we know in history, we do know that oftentimes National Guard and in some cases federal soldiers have been mobilized to stand and protect city and residents and property. Maybe one of the more important questions we should be asking ourselves is, have we as a society become kind of immune to the violence and some of the terrible things that happen in the big cities? For instance, I was visiting Chicago not that long ago, and I was told that there was 70 or 80 people shot in one weekend in Chicago, and I thought to myself, when did it become okay as a society to allow this to happen? And maybe, just maybe, there's got to be some kind of a solution, because what I was seeing and what I saw happen thus far, it seemed like nothing was happening. And if you're not doing anything about violence in the streets and the cause of the violence in the streets, then you're not just putting a lid on a kettle. Instead, you are allowing something to boil on over. And violence does have a way of spreading, and violence, of course, oftentimes afflicts the people who can least afford to have violence. Oftentimes the weak, oftentimes the poor, and in many cases, particularly in big cities, it has an unbalanced effect on minority residents. And of course, the other part of the equation is whether or not it is really okay to use soldiers to solve these problems. And right now, the president's testing an idea, and the idea, if there is some really actionable results that take place, less violence, less crime, less murder, less drugs, you get the picture. This almost becomes an idea that maybe he'll test and try in other places. And of course, that becomes a bigger question mark, because we live in a country that's free. We live in a country of laws. We live in a country where there is a social contract between government and the people, and we make sure we understand that there's a bigger picture here, and we don't want to become a police state under no circumstances. And of course, there are a number of people out there that are very worried about the president and how he flexes his powers. Of course, there's a balance, and in that social contract, we understand that the people of this country understand that, hey, we give up a little bit of our rights to form a government over us, and that government is supposed to do a couple simple things here. According to the Declaration of Independence, we say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, the Constitution says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, to ensure justice and establish domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare. And whether you're in the United States, Canada, or anywhere else throughout the Anglosphere, these are things that should ring true to you, and maybe, just maybe, they're good things to start talking about and be aware of, because once again, our liberties, our freedoms are exactly that. They are things that should be protected, and that's what the job of a government's to do. And when you see sometimes a government possibly at the very brink of overstepping those powers, you want to be aware of them. Number two, you also want to be aware that what is going on to get to this place where there is violence, there is ongoing problems with crime and drugs and things that we didn't sign up for as Americans. And of course, what do we do here on Main Street? Well, we do the things that we're supposed to do. We make sure that we have a little bit of money put aside just in case there's an emergency. Of course, some of you have flocked to gold and silver. But most of all, what we can do here to really protect our freedoms is be an engaged citizen, because being an engaged citizen means you're also participating in the government. Being an engaged citizen also means that you are voting, and maybe most of all, that you are aware of what's going on here. And that's kind of why we have this channel. Thank you for joining me today. Make sure you're liked and subscribed to this channel because it really does matter. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, just remember the biggest battle you fight is the one between your ears over your thoughts and actions. Thanks for joining me.